please introduce yourself to us and tell us how you got interested in the field.
I'm Ed Cafarella, and my interest in the field goes way back to when I was in high school. And I graduated from high school in 1964, and I was an audiovisual aide in high school, which meant we shuttled projectors around and tape recorders. And then when I got into college, I had a part-time job in the audiovisual center, again shuttling around projectors and tape recorders and various and sundry things, and also producing materials. At that day, overhead transparencies were the big thing. So we made lots of transparencies and a lot of photography, shot some 16mm film, and just sort of grew into it. And as I looked at technology, and the technology of those days was very different than the technology of today. But the theme that was there for me was that the technology had a great deal of potential, but we weren't using that potential. We were using, I'd say, almost to entertain the students rather than to teach the students. And sadly, today we still do some of the same kind of thing, that it's more, some of it is entertainment. But it definitely goes back to my high school days.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then from there, where did your career traverse?
Okay. It's a long, convoluted story, so this may go on for just a little bit. I was trained to be a YMCA director, and went out and they had what they called a block placement experience, which was sort of like student teaching, but in a YMCA kind of setting, doing what a YMCA director did. And I did that for 10 weeks, enjoyed it. And I was a street worker working with gangs in Hartford, Connecticut. And our basic task was to round up the kids, mostly teenage boys, late afternoon after school got out, and get them into some productive activities for the afternoon and evening. Basketball, card games, any kind of activities to keep them off the street and in some kind of a positive direction, helping them with schoolwork. And we would work until 11, 12 o'clock at night, and then knock off until noontime the next day, and then gear up again. And I looked at that and said, that's not the way I want to spend my life. So I came back to school and thought I could be a school teacher, because I had a minor in mathematics. So I took the additional courses I needed to finish out that minor, turned into a major, and was certified as a secondary high school math teacher. Mm-hmm. Sat down for an interview with a superintendent of schools who had a real vision for the future. And again, this was 1968. And he's saying, this technology stuff is going to go someplace. Computers are going to go someplace. I want to be in on the ground floor of doing that. Now, computers in those days were mainframe computers. Apple IIs hadn't even been put on the market. IBM personal computers weren't on the market. So this was real early days. So I went in, interviewed for a high school math position. An hour later, I was the director of educational technology for the school district. So it was just a, I was in the right place at the right time, and I had enough skills, knew a little bit more about technology than anyone he had talked to. So I did that. I finished a master's degree in the 3 years that I was teaching, and then went back and did my PhD at Michigan State. And then was looking for a position. My wife is also an academic. We had dated in undergraduate school and got married right after high school, college graduation. So we decided we wanted to get back on the East Coast. And I applied for a position at the University of Maine as a faculty member, and sat down with the director of the center and he and I both, within 2 or 3 minutes, decided that the faculty position he had open was not a match for me. They were looking for somebody with some artistic skills, some graphic skills, who could teach production of audiovisual materials, and that was not my skill set. But he kept talking for about an hour and a half after we had decided that I was not a candidate after 5 minutes. And I'm thinking, what's going on now? I was a green behind the ears, brand new PhD, thinking, I can't just tell this guy that I want to leave, but I'm wasting my time talking with him. About a week later, I got a call from him, and he said, I've just resigned my position as director of the center. I think you'd be an excellent candidate, and I want you to apply. So he had been interviewing me for his position unbeknownst to me. And I went to the University of Maine, directed what was called the Instructional Systems Center, which was a campus-wide support agency to support instruction, design of instruction, production of materials. And then there, got into computers. When I was in graduate school, computers were there, but no one used them. By the time I was at the University of Maine, we were using computers and using what were old punch cards. Do you know what a punch card is? Okay. There are probably a lot of people who are going to listen to this video who have no idea what a punch card was. Okay. But I remember we had a mainframe, and everyone used the same computer. And you had a terminal that was connected to it, or you took a deck of punch cards, turned them in, they ran the job, and gave it back to you 4 or 5 hours later.
And woe be to you if you drop that box.
Oh, yes, I can remember. You have 1,000 cards in a box. They had to be in a prescribed order. And I can remember students running to get a job run, tripping on the step, and the cards going all over the place. I remember we had a mainframe that had 512K of memory. Now, most people who watch this, I don't have any idea what a K is. They talk about megabytes and gigabytes. This was a kilobyte, otherwise known as 1,000 bytes. So there's 512,000 bytes of memory on it. You know, we're not talking millions and billions of bytes. We're talking. And the university added some additional memory to go up to 640K. And if you had special projects and special permission, you could use that extra bit of memory between 512 and 640. And I was able to justify that what I wanted to do needed that, and they let me use it, and I was thrilled. Today, talk about 640K, and don't even talk about it. So I was there for 10 years. And then we decided we wanted to change. My wife's also an academic. And one of the things we decided early in our career was that she would take the lead one time, I would take the lead the next time. The first time when I applied for the math position, she had already had a position as a YMCA director. That's we were in the same program to start out with. And I was a math teacher, and they were looking for math teachers in those days, so she went first, got the job, and then I applied. And then when we went to the University of Maine, I took the job and she followed. Then she got a department chair's position at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I followed her and was on the faculty there. Then went to the University of Northern Colorado, and was not really looking for a position, but a notice came across my desk that looked interesting. They wanted to establish a new PhD program in educational technology. So I looked at it and I set it aside. And a couple of days later, shuffling through materials, I saw it again and looked at it and set it aside. Did that several times. finally I looked at it and said, yeah, this might be interesting to go take a look at. So I was towards the end of the deadline for applying, and I sent in my application. And the story that I was told later, woman Susan Zavacek, who was very active in AECT, I had met years before, and she happened to be on the search committee. And the chair of the search committee came in with my application to a search committee meeting and said, oh, we have another application. And he said, it's somebody from Virginia Commonwealth University. And Susan said, well, that's where Ed Cafarella is. I'll have to give Ed a call and find out about the person. And the chair of the search committee says, it is Ed Cafarella. And the rest was history. And so I went out there, built a new PhD program, hired half dozen faculty, did that for 10 years. And then I took early retirement. That was 2002, 2003. And my wife took a position as the chair of the education department at Cornell University. So I followed her there, thinking that I was going to be retired and sit back and do nothing. And I was looking for something to keep me busy so I didn't get into trouble. And the dean's position opened up at SUNY Cortland, which was about 10 miles away. Huge teacher preparation program aimed at largely undergraduates, a few master's level programs, nothing beyond the master's degree. Turns out it's about the 12th largest teacher preparation program in the country. Huge, trains teachers for largely New York State, but people go other places too, but focuses on New York State. So I applied for the dean's position there, and it happened to be they were looking to achieve NCATE accreditation. I was on the NCATE Board of Examiners at that point, so I knew the process. They had some problems that needed to get resolved. I had the skill set to solve it, and it was a nice fit. So I came out of retirement after 90 days, became the dean at Cortland. Did that for, I guess, 4 or 5 years, and then decided I wanted to finish out my career back in the classroom. So I went back into the classroom. In that case, it was the Educational Leadership Department and training school superintendents and principals. And then I finally actually retired for real in 2013.
Okay, well, let's move on to major ideas and approaches and people who influenced your career.
You gave me the questions the other day, and I looked at that and said, boy, it's going to be a tough one to answer because the list is so long. I guess the biggest group of people who have influenced me, influenced my career, influenced my thinking are the students that I worked with. And students in all programs all the way through, pushing me to think in different ways, pushing me to always be prepared when I walked into a classroom. And if I didn't know something, and I admitted lots of times I didn't know something, to go and find the answer so that we could discuss it. My classes tended to be a lot of open discussion, would present a concept. The students would have had readings beforehand. The expectation was that they had read the readings, and then we were going to challenge those concepts in the classroom and discuss them and shoot them around. And the students after a while would get used to my style, but I'd start laying out a scenario, and and lay out a situation that sort of sounded problematic, and then I'd make it more problematic. And then particularly when I was training superintendents and principals, I'd lay out a situation where a teacher had really screwed up. And then I'd stop after I described what the teacher had done. And it might be having sex with a junior high school student or something of that kind of magnitude. And I'd play a little game and spend several minutes introducing it. Then I'd stop and say, okay, you're the principal of the building. What are you going to do? And the faces would all go white. And would then spend the next half an hour figuring out how you were going to solve that problem. Or I had hundreds of cases like that where I'd lay it out. The students got used to it after a while, but the first few times, it was just literally their faces would go white and say, oh my God, that's not what I want to do. So students were clearly one. People, Ray Wyman, who's a real old-timer in the field. Ray died probably in the 80s, real active at ACT back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Did my master's degree with him, and he taught me to be concerned with students and to deal with students and take students from where they were and move them to the next step. My PhD program, I had the pleasure of working, my chair was Paul Witt, who was the president of ACT back in the 1940s. Woody Miller, who was the president of ACT, I'm going to say in the 1980s, was another faculty member who's real influential. Kent Gustafson, who was chair at the University of Georgia. Ultimately, he was at Michigan State when I studied with him. Had a major influence. And then a fellow named Everett Rogers, who did a lot of research in diffusion of innovations and change theory, terms like early adopter, early majority. Those are all terms that Rogers created. And he had a major influence in my graduate program, but in all the way through my career, looking at change and how we bring about change. And I used to say that it's easy to drop a computer on a faculty member's desk. It's difficult to get that faculty member to use that computer effectively, to use it more than a paperweight or a dust collector. And Roger's work on diffusion and how people change made a big difference. And then when I went to Northern Colorado, I tied up with Gene Hall, who has the concerns-based adoption model. And Gene and I have done a lot of work. We still do work. We've got a project coming up in a few weeks. Again, looking at the change process, how we bring about change in social systems and people to move them from where they are to some new goal.
Excellent. There are a lot of commonage I'd love to talk with you later about.
Okay.
Now, that kind of works in well to your research areas of research. What's your current research? Where has it come from? How has it evolved?
Okay, my current research is being retired. I made a decision when I finally, remember I retired twice. Okay. In 2003, I retired from educational technology and shifted into dean's position, and then eventually a professor of educational leadership. So pretty much put research on instructional technology behind me. And then when I finally retired in 2013, I decided that I wanted to go off and do some other things, so I spend 2 days a week volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, and I have a huge model railroad and work on that.
That's great.
And then I do a little consulting here and there if it's an interesting project.
Well, I seem to recall that you put together a whole set of dissertation information
Yeah.
that I actually use myself.
Oh, good, good.
So I know that's one area of research, and could you talk a little bit about that and some other areas
Yeah,
that you're
sure.
particularly proud of?
When I was at VCU, I was in teacher education, not really in technology. I was teaching a service course in teacher education. And then when I went to the University of Northern Colorado and was heading up the doctoral program, I wanted to get myself spun up on what kinds of research students were doing for dissertations. So I started searching around. This would have been 91, 92, 93, somewhere along there. Pre-internet days. There were some computer databases you could search, but most of the searching was done in a printed volume, and you'd look through under a subject heading and see here are the dissertations that were done on that topic, and you flip a bunch of pages and find another one. So, and computerized databases were just coming along. So I wanted to see what people were doing at other institutions. So I figured the only way I was going to do it was to write them a letter and start collecting those dissertations. So I wrote, and I think we collected the first time 10 years worth of dissertations, and what we collected was the title, the student, the institution, and the faculty member who is the chair, and the student's name. And started building into a database. And the first database we published as a book. AECT published it as a book. And that was a 10-year compilation. And then we came back and did a 1-year compilation after that we also did as a book. And decided that was at the time when CD-ROMs were just coming into vogue. So we said, well, we'll make a CD-ROM of the whole 11 years and bind it into the book and sell the book and the CD-ROM. So we did that, and then the next year I collected them, and the online databases were starting to become available. The internet was starting to evolve. We said, well, why are we even publishing this thing in a paper form? Let's make it an electronic form. And so we made it an interactive database on a server at Northern Colorado. And then each year I would mail out to all the chairs of the departments, and they would send back to me everyone who completed in that year, would add them into the database. And then did that up until probably 10 years ago. And then by then there were lots of other electronic databases that you could get into. And the original purpose was to have a place to go find them, and there were other places to do it, so we didn't do it anymore. And the AECT has the database running on their server now. It's, if anyone wants to go back and look at it, it goes up through, I don't know, 2005, 2006, something like that.
Right. Well, it was very helpful. Other research you'd like to share?
Got a project that we've been working on using quite a bit lately, and moving more into the change theory area. And it's called an Innovation Readiness Adoption Model. It's an interactive tool that we use with schools when they're introducing an innovation in the school to see where they are based on Roger's research and based on Gene Hall's research, to identify areas where they're in good shape and areas where they've got problems. And it's the graphic on it is a multi-pointed star. I think there are 25 points on the star, and it starts out as a star with the arms at full length, And then as an issue becomes less of an issue, that arm becomes shorter and shorter. So eventually that multi-pointed star evolves to just a circle. And we've used that in a lot of projects. We've got one we're doing right now with a school district in Colorado that's adopting a merit pay system for teachers, a true merit pay system. And they've been at it for 3 or 4 years, and we've been using that model to track where they are, where the problems are they need to address. And then we go in there once a year and help them identify the problems and then come up with strategies to address it. And something like merit pay for teachers is a hot topic that teachers in general don't want to be paid that way. And this district is actually doing a very good job in putting a system in place to make that happen. And the teachers are supporting it and the community is supporting it.
That sounds fascinating. I'll look forward to hearing more about that. How about the field? What are the striking changes that you have seen occur over the course of your career in the field?
That when I looked at that question, I had to go back to my first schools, and again, this was back in the late 60s, early 70s. We're using 16 millimeter projectors, we're using audio tape recorders, big clumsy pieces of equipment that most people probably never seen a 16 millimeter projector, but it's the size of a medium-sized suitcase and probably weighs 30 pounds. But one of the problems was something as simple as an electric outlet. If we were lucky, there was one electric outlet in the classroom. In some classrooms, there were no electric outlets. You know, there were electric lights, but in terms of place to plug something in, going back into the 20s, 30s, and 40s, there was no need to plug anything in, so they didn't put outlets in. So simply having an outlet, and then they would typically put one outlet in the back of the classroom, in the middle of the wall, and then you'd string an extension cord up to the projector. And then when we moved to things like overhead projectors, which you wanted in the front of the classroom, there was no plug in the front of the classroom, so you had to run the wire to the back, and then eventually they added in. And then when we went into using computers and small computer labs, a half dozen computers in a classroom, that introduced another whole need for electricity in classrooms. That sounds like a pretty simple thing, but it's a pretty complicated thing if you don't have electricity in the classroom as a basic thing to start out with. Another big change was the convergence of technologies. We had a 16 millimeter projector that allowed us to show motion. So anything we wanted to show as a moving image, what we do on video today, it was on a 16 millimeter projector. If we wanted an audio, it was an audio tape recorder, and that was a separate piece of equipment. If you wanted a still image, you had a 35 millimeter slide projector. If you wanted to have something that you could use to present to a class and write on, you had an overhead projector. So in a classroom, you might have 6, 8, 10 pieces of equipment. And over the years, all of that has converged into a computer or a laptop connected to a projector or a smart board that shows up in the front of the room. So that was a huge change. I made a couple of notes here on that. Let me see if I hit. Another big change, and this is more a philosophical change, would be a focus on student learning. And that's a huge change. I've been at this for about 50 years. And in my early days, the teacher or the professor's role was to deliver instruction. And you didn't worry about whether the students were learning it. You didn't worry about whether they had the background that they needed to understand what you were saying. Your job was to deliver instruction. Over those 50 years, we've flipped around, and now a clear focus on student learning. Where is the student? What do I need to do to take the student from where they are up to where I want them to be or where they want to be? So that's a huge, huge philosophical shift.
Big change. Okay, and then how would you like to be remembered within the profession?
I guess as a person who cared about other people, cared about the development of people. I never wanted to be out in the limelight and waving my hat around. I was much happier helping other people grow and develop.
And along those lines, are there any major accomplishments that you, when you look back at your career, that kind of stand out to you?
I'd say one accomplishment is the current president of AECT, who was a student of mine at Northern Colorado, and I've had lots of other students, but she happens to be the president of AECT now. Is doing a real nice job, real smart, bright woman. So that would be one accomplishment. What else did I say here? I guess one accomplishment, and this one most people don't even know about, but AECT almost went belly up a couple of times, you know, like that close to going belly up. And I was on the board both of those times. I don't know whether it was because I was on the board that the association was going belly up, but I hope not. But we did some work to salvage it and to see some opportunities. We had I guess another piece of my career is to be able to see an opportunity and seize that opportunity, and to be able to take some risks to move and seize that opportunity. I mentioned my first teaching position when I applied for a math teacher and became the director of educational technology. I could have very easily said, no, I want to be a math teacher, but saw some opportunity there. The superintendent really didn't know what he wanted, didn't have a clear picture, but saw that technology was going to be important. And he and I took that dream and built technology for the school district. So there's some risk-taking to be done.
And it sounds too like, especially with your interest in Roger's works and everything, that you probably would characterize yourself as someone who facilitates change.
I hope so, yeah.
It sounds like it from your career. Yeah. Okay, final question. What are your favorite AECT memories? Can you share any stories with us?
Okay, there are a couple of stories. These go way back. There was a professor at Ohio State, Sidney Pressey, and this would have been back in the 30s or the 40s. And he built a teaching machine, what we'd do today on a computer self-instruction program, but he built it on a manual typewriter. So it was an old, do you even know what a manual typewriter is? Okay. For those of you who don't know what it is, it was you pushed a key down and an arm came up and made the letter on the paper. Go back in the internet and look up a manual typewriter. But he adapted a manual typewriter as a teaching machine. And if you got the correct answer, it dispensed a lifesaver. So he had
Rewards.
Reward, yep, yeah. And I don't know if you got it for every right answer, or you got it for every 10 right answers, or whatever it was. But he had worked it out, and this little Lifesaver would come out in this little cup. And he used the machine for a long time, and then Lifesaver changed the size of the Lifesaver to be just a little bit larger. So it didn't fit in this little cup anymore in his machine. So he searched around to find something he could use, and he found that a Tums fit in there very nicely.
The antacid.
The
Tums.
antacid Tums. So when someone asked him about how it was working, giving out a Tums instead of a Lifesaver, he came back and said, "It seems to help with the digestion of the material."
Oh no, that's great.
Another memory that I have, these are silly memories, but Charles Cafarella, who was a CBS television commentator at the time of Walter Cronkite, and he had a program where he would travel around the country in a big motor home and interview interesting people in interesting places around the country, and would do a piece with Walter Cronkite. But Charles Cafarella did the keynote address at an ACT meeting, and in those days it was a big focus on 16 millimeter films, and all the film producers were trying to sell 16 millimeter films. So there was a good bit of alcohol flowing, and they'd have suites where you could go and sit and watch films for hours on end and get all the free booze you wanted. And there were probably 30 or 40 different film production companies that were doing this, and that set up in all the suites of a hotel. And I remember Charles Cafarella got up to do the keynote, and he opened up by saying he was a big, huge guy with a real deep, deep voice. And he said something like, "If there's any justice in this world at all, when the liquor dealers of America meet, they will stay up all night watching 16 millimeter films."
That's good. Great. Well, good. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover that we didn't?
No, I think you've done very nicely. It was a nice set of questions.
That's great.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome.